Internet freedom in Saudi Arabia. I'll start out by asking you my research question. Will internet access help improve Saudi Arabian society? I'll start by explaining why internet access is necessary for human innovation. The internet is an essential tool in order to progress and innovate in this modern world that we live in. And Saudi Arabia is at a major disadvantage because they don't have that free access to the internet. The internet can allow furthering in education and enhancement in job opportunities, which can lead to not only a more educated people, but also a higher yearly income for the average citizen. And not only would they be more educated and have more money, but there would also be a more free flow of ideas, which could allow for more innovation and progression as a society. I'm going to jump right into my solutions. My first solution is that of governmental reform, and the primary goal would be loosen regulations on internet restrictions, internet censorship. Now, this solution has two aspects, and it's one solution with two primary benefits. The first being education. The internet can help people, like I said, further their education, which can lead to more money, and actually help the economy grow as a whole. And it can also allow new opportunities, giving people a plethora of information, as well as opening doors in and out of the classroom. And when online material is available to teachers and professors, they can provide a more engaging lesson for some of the students, which can in turn give the opportunity to the students to extend their knowledge further. And so it also can be beneficial for teachers because they can spend more time individually connecting with each individual student. And what would need to happen here is national policies that would include technology and education, coming together. They would need to be passed by the government in order for the internet's benefits on education to be maximized. The second aspect is freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is the basic human right which upholds all other human rights. And human rights are what allow people to innovate and progress. Having human rights and having that ability to express one's opinion. And the ability to express one's opinion is critical if society is to change positively. Now, in order for society to be truly free, there must be the free flow of ideas. Now, that doesn't mean that there will be no offense that comes to any group of people. If you look at the examples of Charles Darwin and Galileo Galilei, those were two of the most influential men of all time with their scientific discoveries. But it did come with great religious upset at the time of their discoveries. Now, I feel that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. proposes the best solution to this problem of an unjust law. Now, Dr. King argues that an unjust law ought to be challenged through an act called civil disobedience. Civil disobedience is a type of peaceful protest that can be done to protest an unjust law, which he defines as something that does not uplift human personality. In fact, it degrades it. And so what would need to happen in Saudi Arabia's case is there would need to be civil disobedience and protests that would peacefully go on against the government's unjust laws on internet censorship. And so, of course, there are limitations. The internet does not, of course, answer and solve every one of education's problems. The success of the internet in education would be measured by the educational outcomes, such as higher paying jobs, better jobs, and more college acceptances. But the free internet access would allow this free thought and this free expression. And this could potentially lead to the high-ranking Saudi Arabian officials to lose their power. Now, Saudi Arabia is a very religious country. In fact, it was some 1,400 years ago where the Prophet Muhammad made his trek and started his spread of Islam in Saudi Arabia. Of course, there is Mecca in Saudi Arabia, which brings millions and millions of Islamic people to worship there every year. And so it is Saudi Arabia is one of the biggest Islamic states in the world, and it is governed as such. So it uses a code called Sharia, and Sharia has an immense impact on what kind of laws are written and how they're written. Specifically, laws having to do with gambling, pornography, substance abuse, divorce, marriage, and all kinds of things. So, for example, the anti-cyber crimes law that was enacted in 2007, according to the Saudi Arabian embassy, this law specifically prohibits content that disrupts public order, public morals, religious values, and privacy through the network of information networks or computers. Now, my second solution may be able to help with this problem. This is the private sector backing these reforms. So and actually, there already have been plans put into place using this solution. It's called Saudi Vision 2030, and there was a meeting at a committee called the Key Reforms for Potential Investors. And what it's basically trying to emphasize is that for the future generation of Saudi Arabia, they need to be more educated, because Saudi Arabia has, for centuries, been this rich country with vast land and oil, and they've lived very cushy, nice lives, and there hasn't been much need for progression or innovation. But now that those materials are running a little bit more thin, the private sector is really trying to emphasize getting education and getting this free flow of ideas out and about, so that country as a whole can innovate and progress. So it's basically giving them a big reality check. And so basically the government would be pressured into changing their laws on internet censorship. Of course, there are limitations to this law that, although the governmental reforms, so the limitations do not apply to this law, there is another big limitation to this. When the business gets too big, it can throw the government off a little bit, because the business could get more influence than the government has now. So that can lead to potential conflict between them. Although it isn't clear what the conflict would be, there would definitely be a conflict for sure. But none of these gains are guaranteed. Achieving them requires, first and foremost, a regulatory framework for affordable internet access, and that encourages investment in connectivity at a lower cost. And this is critical to unlocking the internet's full potential in education and ensuring free speech. Thank you.
Okay, Austin, how valid and reliable are the sources you used? How did you know which sources didn't work?
So this was an interesting topic. A very, very good question. What I had to do is I had to go specifically to the source. I had to go to the Saudi Arabian embassy. I had to go to these Saudi Arabian websites, and I even had to translate one website into English, because there isn't a lot of information really easily available to the public. In specific, there was a law, and there was a law that was enacted in 2004 that actually, if you Googled something, if you used the internet in some way, it would take away, it just wouldn't, it's like a net nanny for the entire nation, right? I mean, if you were to look up Jamal Khashoggi, the journalist who was killed, nothing would come up. They didn't know about that. They aren't aware of those kind of things going on. And so that was one thing specifically that isn't very public knowledge. I had to do a really lot of dig deeply in my research and do that. But there were sources that did not work because they just weren't credible. People would be basically saying, well, Saudi Arabia doesn't allow people to use the internet, when in fact that's not true. 16.5 of the 36 million people in Saudi Arabia have regular internet access. They can type on the computer and look up things. It's just what they can see. So,
if you had more time, what additional research would you conduct related to this issue?
I would like to see how internet access in depth has helped countries, in the Middle East and maybe in Asia, has helped them having free internet access. Maybe looking at somewhere like Japan that doesn't have as strict of regulations, and see how they've been able to progress, and they've been able to innovate and come up with new things, and how their economy has been stable and growing, or you know, just to see the positive effects that could happen, so that I could basically, you know, have something backing up my claims that this internet access would be helpful. So